Welcome to the Immanuel Network podcast. My name is Ryan Fullerton, and I'm the lead pastor of Immanuel Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And this season, I am joined, and when I say joined, I'm using the term loosely because he's actually 702 miles away. But I'm joined via the interwebs by my co-host, Matt DeLauder, who is the lead pastor of Immanuel Community Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. In this episode, we're going to follow up on our last episode where we discussed men and manhood. And in case the nuggets of gold from that last episode have floated downstream in the river of your mind, only to be forgotten, I'll remind you that we thought a little bit about the current discussion of manhood in the evangelical world and a little bit beyond. We looked a little at the thought of Aaron Wrenn, and Nancy Piercy, Anthony Bradley, and Richard Reeves. And from there, we plumbed the depths of another thinker on the subject on manhood, our own practical theologian and pastor, the Reverend Matthew DeLauder. And while we were unearthing these nuggets of golden wisdom from Matthew's mind, the whole subject of men and fire pits and third places came up. In other words, we went from discussing what manhood is to discussing one of the places manhood is formed. We went from what to where. So in this episode, we're going to look at the where of manhood. Not the only place manhood happens, of course, but we're going to be looking at some of the spaces where manhood, and especially male friendships, can be formed. Joining us for this discussion is my friend, our former co-pastor. We all work together as elders at Immanuel in Louisville, Ben Hedrick. Ben is currently the founder and managing partner of Plowshares Capital and currently a member of our Immanuel Network partner church, Commission Church in Shelbyville, Kentucky. Welcome, Ben. It's good to have you.
Glad to be here.
And welcome, Matthew. As always, it's good to be with you. We're talking today about third spaces. We'll maybe get into a little bit of that term. Those, of course, are spaces that are not workspaces, our second spaces, and not our home, which would be our first place, but a place where people can meet outside of both of those environments. And both of you brothers have done some time putting together a place where men can build friendships and build relationships. And I wondered if we could just begin with me asking both of you, what kind of third spaces have you guys created? Tell us a little bit about where you gather men and what happens there and how often you meet. So Ben, let me start with you. What goes on at your place that forms manhood and male friendships?
Sure. So once a month, I have a group of guys, both people I've known for a long time, and they invite folks every once in a while, and I invite new folks every once in a while, but they come and sit on my front porch. I'm blessed to have a great big deep front porch that is a good context year round. And we sit at 8 o'clock and we go until sometimes the wee hours of the morning talking about anything, everything, or nothing. And we always sing a couple of songs, hymns at 10 o'clock. And that's it. That's the rhythm.
Now, I've been to a number of these times. I'm not there every month, but I've been a number of times. We're talking 15 to 45 guys. Would that be about accurate?
Yeah. At different times, it's been one.
Okay, we did a one.
Yeah, and then it can get packed out sometimes too. I emphasize that it's a standing invitation. I very rarely adjust the time. Only maybe once a year do I adjust when the time slot is, and encourage people to think about, you're always invited. You can always come. It's regular, so if you can't make it, no worries. But yeah, sometimes there's a lot of people and sometimes there's just a few, and I don't always know how many folks are going to be
Sure. Matthew, tell us a little bit what you're doing down in New Orleans, where the winters are a little warmer and it's a little more friendly for men meeting year round. But
yes, the fireside, it's if we got weather enough, cold enough to enjoy that, it's great. Sometimes it's just practical enough to keep the mosquitoes away. But this actually started back for me during COVID, around, I guess like summer 2020. Some guys and I would just get up early in the morning and do a workout together. And just doing something hard together, doing something together in general. And then we would take time at the end just to pray for one another. So that's kind of how I started thinking about, I really enjoy this, seem to have meaningful conversations. And so now it's transitioned to something that we've been doing this past year, similar to what Ben is describing, just open invitation to men. So instead of the front porch, it's happening on our back deck. And similar to what Ben said, we could talk about anything and everything under the sun. Sometimes it's lighthearted talking about sports, but sometimes it's, talking about the struggles of someone's workplace situation, fear of losing a job, how to parent, how to be a better husband, or just the things that may be causing them to lose sleep at night. So it can go from very trivial to serious, and I've seen some good friendships being forged there.
Okay, so obviously all kinds of guys get together and work out. We're not the first people to sit around a fire with a group of men. But as you guys are doing this, there's some particular things in your mind that you're really thinking men need. So tell us a little bit what you're thinking, what need is met by these kind of times with guys, and maybe what kind of spaces you think men might be attracted to. Now we can start. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was waiting on the lag a little bit.
No, you're good.
For me, the original idea came from two experiences that were happening at relatively the same time. One was I've partly in my role at Immanuel when I was on staff here is I traveled a lot and a lot of different parts of the world. And consistently what I would observe in those places that I'd travel is social contexts where men seem to function, at least functionally, would get together with other men. And they were just a men's social environment, whether it was in Turkey or whether it was in Iraq or whether it was in Sumatra. Like there was always a context where the men got together. And I got to interact with observe some of those contexts and think about, well, where is this context in America or in my town or with men in my culture? That was one question that was started. A second thing that happened about that same time was Roger's book, Live Not by Lies. And I read that, I found it very, very compelling. And one of the things he interacts with in that book is the significance of small groups as resistance cells to soft totalitarianism or even hard totalitarianism, and the importance of knowing people face to face and knowing them in a way that is genuine and real and unmediated. And so I was feeling probably like every American, the effects of social media, how you can have friends and networks of people that are totally mediated by technology, the diminishing of personal face-to-face friendships, and then also the observations of other cultures. And I was like, I think it would be really helpful. I would love to participate in this. And then my bent is, well, if I would love to be a part of it and it doesn't exist, then I'll start it. And that was where I'm just going to start inviting people to my front porch and telling them why I'm doing it, and then just keep doing it through thick and thin. And so that was kind of the genesis of the idea is these are really important if culture continues to go in this way, to know people in a face-to-face way. And it's healthy for men. That's cross-culturally. It's not just an American culture dynamic. It's something that seems to be transcultural. And by that, it seems to be something that is for men as men, no matter what culture dynamic or what culture you're in.
That's great. Matthew, how would you add to that?
Yeah, I think just growing up and having really good friendships that have been forged through such gatherings, and seeing that not happening in some men's lives who are close to me. And I think sometimes I would hear from certain people, well, men just aren't as good as doing relationships and friendships as women are. And I'm just like, I don't know if that's true. It may be that we're putting an expectation that friendship has to look and happen how it is happening for women. And so I was just like, I think what I was saying with the workout groups, it got me to thinking, maybe I just need to bring some more intentionality, kind of like what Ben was saying here. I need to bring some more intentionality to this, because as I get in those groups, I would see that men were talking about things as good as community group is, that they were talking about things that I wasn't hearing them talk about in community group. And so even things that we talked about last time on this podcast, just seeing a hunger, honestly, to be fathered, to have advice given to them, to be pushed back on in some ways, and so just and even seeing like these guys are going to the internet, they're going and finding see these male leaders that they can get advice from on the internet. If they're hungry in those ways, like why are we not creating a space where we can try to meet that hunger? And then this may be like a last thing that I'd add here is just giving a context. And I said this at our men's retreat last year, just to let men be men. They're going to act a little differently in conversation. Say if a lady's not around, and I think that's perfectly okay. And so I've noticed, just a freeness and conversation, and not in a sinful manner, but just in a way that they would maybe be a little more reserved, depending on what the conversation is about. And I'll just give an example of this. I remember being in youth group, and a young girl who we all looked up to. She was a great sister in our youth group. You had this time where we were all sharing, and she used that as an opportunity to rebuke a lot of the young teenage boys in the group by how we talked to one another. And I remember just thinking at that time, like, yeah, I want to follow Jesus. Like, man, am I wrong for how I relate to my fellow brothers? We're just, young Christians. And I remember years later thinking about that situation and thinking that she was sincere, but I don't think she was right. Like, I think there were ways that we interacted with one another that just wasn't how she wanted to interact in friendship. And so, yeah, just wanting to create context where men can even feel free to do that.
That's super helpful. And so, obviously it's not like there are no other contexts where men are interacting. Men are interacting Sunday mornings. Men are interacting, say, at a men's breakfast, although that's generally more of a teaching focused time in most churches. It certainly is in our congregation. In small groups, you've got more of a mixed dynamic, although some small groups will break up men and women, but often you're dealing with men and women together, and that's going to bring a different dynamic into things. What particularly do you think, and maybe be specific, what are you noticing when the men are getting together with just the men in that sort of no agenda, no formal teaching kind of a time? What is happening there that isn't happening in those other times and places?
I think that Matthew was alluding to this, and just to kind of flesh it out a little bit more, I think that the way that men interact is just it's more assertive and unqualified. Like, they just say exactly what's on their mind without, not in a callous sense, but without caring how you feel about it. And when it's a mixed gender kind of context, or there are sisters or ladies present, like, there's just a more carefulness there. And I think there ought to be a more carefulness to, how is this coming across? I need to be careful of certain things. And when it's just men talking to one another, it's not as though their communication is careless in the sense of they don't care, but it's just it's a freer, assertive exchange of ideas and thoughts without qualification.
I've noticed many times, Ben, on your front porch, and I think it's probably happened to me, and it's probably happened from me too. A guy will say something stupid, and multiple guys or one guy will say, "That's stupid," and it's not the end of the world. That's not usually language that works with your wife's daughters or your friend's wife, but it is. I think it just is a general way. Actually, as I left one time, thought that's actually a form of accountability. You don't get to say stupid stuff without someone saying something to you about it. Yeah. And so another feature I've noticed, and I did do something like this at my place for about a year ago, but a few things I'll just mention as having noticed, and see if this resonates with you guys. I think there's often a willingness for guys to talk about their work in an extended way. One of the things my brother, who lived most of his adult life, will point out is that his experience in the Canadian church, work was almost never discussed about the men, because when you went to church, you talked about Bible stuff. And then there was no context where you talked about work stuff. And so I've seen in multiple situations where guys are speaking freely about the challenges of work, and they're not they do eventually get around to applying chapter and verse and biblical principles to what they're doing, but it starts by talking shop, if you will, about their work, and then moves into maybe seeking counsel from other guys.
Yeah. And on that note, like I was careful in the beginning, less careful about it now, because I don't think it matters as much. The tone and culture of the group dynamic has been set. But at the beginning, I was very careful to curate who I invited, because I wanted the conversation to be about the work context, and to be, for lack of a better term, filled with normie guys, and not guys who are going to talk about their seminary classes or their, the academic workload. I got feedback. It wasn't very long before a guy who had a regular job and a regular family life, who was like, I like coming to this because I can talk about movies and work, and I don't feel like I'm not in the loop on theology and academic coursework. And I was really thankful, because I didn't have to prompt that at all. He just kind of said, I really like coming here, and this is one of the dynamics I like. So it's just a free exchange of, here's my normal life, and I can talk about it here, and the other guys have something similar going on.
And that's largely a starting point issue too, and maybe a cultural setting issue, because it's not uncommon on your front porch for things to turn theological,
Sure.
or for theology to be applied to every aspect of life. But it's not sort of starting as an in-speak, we're just sort of guys who are in the know, could kind of create a kind of a closed cell that only they can really fully participate in. Yeah, that's good.
That's probably more unique to Louisville than it is New Orleans in that context, perhaps. Or would you agree, Matthew?
Yeah. So we're really close to a seminary, and so we'll have a good mix of seminary students, along with your regular one of my good friends, he'll come to these nights that we hang out on deck, who is an electrician in the city. Another guy who's engineer for Shell, and so similar things. Ben, like, we just want to direct conversations to them being able to talk about work or talk about their families, and to talk. And Ben, I think I really like how you put this, just to be able to talk in an unqualified way. Or if there's something that they want to talk about related to culture, like politics, that they can, speak in a way that, no one's just going to, pounce on them. They can, work some things out in front of everyone. And like Ron said, you may get some pushback there, but it doesn't have to be like super qualified that you would say or something, or try to entertain a thought, and someone's not going to kind of label you as like the worst person in the world. So but I think that unqualified environment has been really helpful.
I think a lot of contexts, and I actually don't think they're just unique to being in a seminary town, because when I travel around and preach, I actually find that there can be an awareness and an eagerness to get into every theological issue that's on the internet that's actually heightened in those other situations. So I actually don't find it just limits itself to a seminary community. But what I do find is that in churches in our circles, guys can sometimes feel like before they speak, they have to pass a theological test. And I think that's just a killer for any kind of fellowship. And if you can just start where you are, and then have guys who are really your peers be speaking, whether it's practical wisdom or theological wisdom in your life, I think creates a far more conducive opportunity for fellowship for a lot of guys. That's good. Well, what would you say keeps men from prioritizing friendship? What is keeping men in our day from prioritizing times like this, or times where they're really cultivating friendship? Matthew, I just loved what you said about the comment that men are always depicted as less relational. And I think that actually runs counter to what we know about the image of God, that we're made in the image of a triune God. So it really wouldn't be possible to be made in the image of that God and not be relational. He's relational. So it really has to be about a different way of doing relationships, and it can be about not being relational. It can't be an option to be made in the image of God. So why are men not prioritizing cultivating friendships, even though they're made in the image of a very relational God?
You want to take a stab at that, Matthew?
Yeah, I think there can. Yeah, so I think there can be a lot of reasons to this, but one that comes to mind for me is sometimes it's just men trying to be good husbands and being good fathers, and so like I'll give the example. If I've ever had anybody kind of cancel last minute, they can't come hang out on the deck and spend a couple hours with the men there. It's usually because either their wife has had a long week that week. They haven't spent enough time with their kids, and I can just. I was talking with someone about this the other day. Particularly if you have situations where mothers are spending more time with the children, it's a lot easier to say, "Hey, mom, go, go to the event that the church is having tonight for women," and it's a little more like guilty. Your conscience is clear to go. Where I think what I've experienced for some men is just I can't neglect my family tonight, or I feel like I'd be burdening my wife to come. So that's been something that I've experienced. I'd be curious what Ben has seen as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that comes up in the specific guys that are getting together on my front porch. I think if you're referring to more broadly, why do men more broadly in culture have a diminished outlet for social interactions? I think I would just broadly reference there seems to be a lot of conversation and research and broad general agreement that male friendship is lacking. Like that's not a partisan issue. That's a broad observation. That male depression is a serious issue. Like there's just broad recognition in society at large that men are struggling. And the reasons why that is where you get into different ideas. My opinion, I think that it's the consequence of a view and a kind of a retreat of men who've been told and informed that their way of interacting is actually bad and dangerous and hurtful, neglectful, and toxic. And so they've been told that the way that they engage the world is bad for the world, and that they've been corrected and kind of had their hand slapped, socially speaking, in lots of different ways and lots of different fronts. And so they've retreated, and so they don't interact in those ways. And then the implications of that are the consequences that men are having. If there's male loneliness, there's a lack of male friendship, there's male depression, there's a lot of lack of male vision, positive vision, and hopefulness for the world, because they've been corrected so heavily by society at large. And I think that my opinion, that's generally true in society, and that Christian men just kind of breathe that air, and they don't know what it looks like to interact as a man, and they're not given outlets to do that. And the appropriate social interactions are essentially feminized, and they're just not interested in that. They'll go to it out of a sense of maybe duty, but they're not going to thrive in the midst of it because it's not masculine.
One of the things that you cultivated during your time here at Immanuel, Ben, which I've seen on your front porch and I see broadly at Immanuel now, is a normalization of talking freely about getting ahead. And of course, by getting ahead, that often can immediately have a stigma. Oh, greed, love of money. And of course, all that's a real danger. That can all be there. But also, if you're going to take care of a wife and ever-growing brood of children, you're going to have to get ahead in some way, shape, or form, if that's not going to be an absolute disaster for you. And so one of the things I've just seen is guys even talking about, how do you cultivate your resume to get a promotion? How do you work with your boss to stand out? Or how do you switch companies at the right time to put yourself in a better position? And I think that those conversations being viewed as pious, like something you would do to best care for your family and exercise dominion in the world, rather than just as sort of a necessary evil that you participate in when you're not Bible reading, I think is hugely helpful. And so I think that's an encouraging. I think I've seen a lot of that kind of context provided in these sort of opportunities for discussion. The other thing I might say, and you guys can tell me this is stupid if you think, but I wonder if there's a sense in which women often will engage emotionally first and men will engage emotionally eventually. So I don't like the idea that women are emotional, men aren't emotional. That doesn't seem right to me. David certainly wouldn't know what that was talking about. But it does seem to me that if you get a group of guys together and you start with, so how does everyone feel tonight? You basically just killed the conversation. But if you let things progress along the lines of like, what are you doing? What are you involved in? Eventually you get to what guys are scared of, what they're afraid of, where the emotion, what might break their heart. But it usually comes after the doing portion. Whereas I think with our sisters, with our wives, it's a little easier sometimes just to start with, I'm sad, those sort of things. Thoughts on that? Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I think that you guys mentioned Aaron Wren and interacted with some of his. I think that both he and Anthony Bradley, I think, have done well of affirming and cultivating, at least in a covering in a positive light of the desire for growth and progress and furthering ambition amongst men. And so one of the ways that works itself out is I'll ask the guys not how are you doing when they come over. It's like, how's work today? And then how's work today? And then eventually in my mind, I'm wanting to get to a place where I'm like, so what's next at work? Like, what's the next promotion? Like, where's your pathway up? Like, what are you angling for? And if they're not thinking that way, I'm like, you should think that way. Like it's not just like, oh, today was a bad day. Or it's like, okay, well, how do you get through that? How do you navigate? And then if it was a great day, I was like, how does that help you get to what's next? And always be thinking of how do you, not in a selfish, proud sense of climb the ladder, but how do you advance? How do you take dominion? How do you dominate at work? How do you win? How do you win? And how do you progress? And helping them and pushing them to think like that and encouraging them to think like that. Because as a man, I think that your happiness is going to be tied to your ability to see that and pursue it. And if you can't see it and you can't pursue it, and then you're just stuck in it's just today and what I have now. And a man is not going to thrive if all he is given is the maintenance of what he currently has. He's going to need to see, how do I go further and gain more ground? And that's what's exciting.
Yeah. And I think just to not tack on the theology, but maybe to provide the underpinning for that, we were made to be kings of the earth. We were made to take dominion. And in the marriage relationship, we were made to take the lead in that. And our wives are to come along as helpers to that process. And so if you sort of put a guy in a place where he's in a dead end street, it's just soul killing and soul sucking. And so there really has to be a context where men can really pursue that. And of course, there are dead end jobs. There are guys who are never going to rise above middle management, but that is something that you're going to be better off lamenting than just sort of taking as that's the way it is.
Yeah. And helping them think of like, well, is that all there is? Like, is there something you can like just encourage them? And I think that's good masculine accountability accountability is not always and only focused on sexual morality. Like it should be, it shouldn't stop short of that. But it's also like, are you thinking creatively? Are you like, is there something that you're not considering? What have you thought about this? Like, why don't you do this? Or why couldn't you make this jump? Or like pushing men in those ways.
It's good. What do you see? Did you want to add to that, Matthew?
Well, yeah, and I think this is, and we talked about this last time, just of how our nature can relate to our function. We even talked about, Paul last time saying to the Corinthian church, act like men, saying that to men and women. So showing that they both have the capacity to do whatever he's calling them to do. But we said that's more relating to be courageous, be strong. And so it's speaking to man's nature being more inclined in those ways. So I think the same thing, we even referenced Paul talking about being gentle, like a nursing mother. So seeing gentleness to be more congruent with her nature. I do think it can come up into what you're just even bringing up now, that yes, God's created us both to relate emotionally, But if there's stereotypes in society, it may be there for a reason. As you're saying this, I'm thinking about a recent skit I heard or saw with Bill Burr on it, where these sons are calling their dads and asking him how he's doing, and he's like, "Well, the Eagles are they're doing pretty good this year." "No, Dad, how are you doing?" "Well, the quarterback, it's just like, that stereotypes there is probably there for a reason. It doesn't mean that men cannot emotionally get there, but there may be, and I do think, a way in which God has composed women that they can maybe be a little more grounded in those ways, that they feel like how someone is feeling in that situation. And so, and I think that's where dad can also be helpful to say, okay, this is a time not to necessarily deny our emotions, but to be, strong as we're feeling overtaken. I experienced this even recently. We're in the middle of a game that we're clearly going to lose the other day. And my son, who plays quarterback, he's starting to cry. And I was like, look, you can cry after the game, but we can't cry right now because we have to finish this game. I'm not telling him to deny his emotions. I'm just saying we have to have some self-control right now. And so I don't know. I think that's just only if I'm adding anything there. I do think there is a sense in which how God has composed women that it's right to maybe expect some differences there, but it doesn't give the men excuse that I cannot be emotionally vulnerable. And some of that, maybe this is the last thing I'll say here, some of that is just not having an example. Like I think so many men, if we talk about we're in a fatherless society, then we can expect that there's men who are they're not going to know how to relate to women. They're not going to know how to relate to their children. They're not going to know how to operate in the workplace if they haven't seen that good examples of that as well. So yeah, but I may have just threw a whole mess out there, but those are just some thoughts that I had stirring there when you're talking about differences between men and women.
Yeah, and I think if you don't put men in those contexts where you've got someone like a coach, someone like a drill sergeant, someone like a father in your life, then you really don't prepare men to be men in the workplace or in the world, where they're going to encounter people who just shoot them straight and tell them they're not doing the job or that they are doing the job. So we really have to even cultivate those kind of relationships among men, almost to soften the blow of the real world, or maybe better said, to prepare them for what's going to happen in the real world.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a quote from someone, and it's interesting how sometimes you hear something quoted and you have no idea where it came from. You're not quite even sure who mentioned it the first time, and then you go and you look it up. It's like, who referenced that? And then the person who referenced it, you're like, I don't think I've ever read anything they've ever said.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quote someone I've never read, and I'm not sure who referenced it and how I came across it.
And if there's any terrible connotations, we'll dismiss those.
I think it's an amazing quote, and he's capturing the difference between men and women. And Roman Payne is apparently the writer who said this, and it was, men build houses, women are houses.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have been Wendell-Berry that I came across it. It could have been Jay Budashevsky that I came across it. It could have been Aaron Wren that I came across. I'm not sure where I came across.
I've seen it too, but I don't know where I see it.
I think it captures it right. Is men are like, do it this way, not that way. That's the way you build a house. And women are houses in the sense of, like, first of all, fundamentally, they're the home for a child as it grows in its first 9 months of life, and then they cultivate the home, and their gifts and their strengths and their tendencies are in line with that design. And men's gifts and tendencies are in line with that. I'm gonna build something, and I'm gonna assert myself in the world, and I'm gonna shape the world. And a woman is, I'm going to cultivate the world around.
Well, just very practically, it reminds me of something we heard over and over when we renovated the building we're sitting in right now, which is the first thing you have to do is protect the envelope. Mm-hmm. You have to first get the shingles down. You have to first get the external sealed. And I think of that way, that applies certainly to the pastoral office. If we protect the doctrine of the church, all kinds of gardening can happen in it that we don't necessarily have to be in the middle of. But I think also we want to help men be those kinds of people who can build sealed, strong structures for all kinds of life-giving to happen inside of.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in all kinds of different contexts.
Yeah. the protection dynamic that a man has to guard the boundaries, I think it's in line with the way a man functions in his family and the way men function in society, and it's the way that elders function in the church. They guard the confessional boundaries of the church for the flourishing of the sheep, and they're less concerned about how the heretic feels when they contradict them and they argue with them, and because they're primarily concerned about guarding the boundary.
Okay, so there's going to be different relationships among men in these contexts. Some relationships are going to be, of course, peers, and the kind of stuff I'm about to say wouldn't generally apply to peers. It would be disrespectful, dishonoring. But I think especially with older men to younger men, there's just a huge role in helping younger men learn how to walk in the world. And that can mean everything to you're never going to get a wife unless you start wearing deodorant, to helping them think about the job they're going to get so that they can provide for someone. I've brought my youngest son to your front porch multiple times, and it's always super encouraging for me to look over and just see him handling himself, not so much under my wing, but it's just one of the men in the circle. What are some things you've seen, whether it's peer to peer or sort of more father to son, not necessarily physically father to son, but paternally? What have you seen in terms of the growth of men who are sitting on your front porch or sitting on your back deck? What are the things you've been particularly encouraged by?
Well, I would say this, Ryan, and Ben's touched on this a little bit, and Anthony Bradley and I think Aaron Wren actually talk about this in an interview together, but the importance of maybe pastors leading in this way, that it's okay that you don't know everything about everything, but finding people in your church, men in your church who can speak to other men in the church about those very tangible things that they're dealing with every day. Maybe the management of their money, or, hey, I want to start a business. I have no clue on how to do that. And just it can be anything under the sun, but you have certain men in your church who are maybe wondering, what function do I have in the church that I can help someone in this life? And they can help with the advice that they have, or with the wisdom they've built over time, that they can share with young men in church. And so one of the things Aaron Rand and Anthony Bradley was saying is, like, when you try to create these, it's based on Bradley's book of Heroic Fraternities, but pastors, creating context where they're not necessarily the ones speaking, but they've facilitated a context where older men or more experienced men can speak into the lives, maybe on specific issues like financial management, and just have a place that you can do that.
Yeah, I would just say, like, I think one of there are a handful of moments that stick out in my mind as, like, this is where I remember observing something on my front porch is like, this is why I do this. And one of them was it was a particularly large group, and larger than can have one conversation. So there's often, if it's a large group, there's multiple conversations going on, and I wasn't involved in any of them. Like, I wasn't even, I just kind of sat back in my rocking chair, and I looked to my left and I saw guys like head down talking. I looked to my right and I saw multiple groups of guys head down talking. And I just leaned back and smiled and smoked my cigar in silence and watched it. And it's like that's one of the outcomes of, like, seeing guys interacting, having conversation that's meaningful to them, and knowing that they're here and they're doing this because I invited them and I've provided a steady, regular context where they know that they're welcome. Yeah. And that's a great outcome for me.
I was thinking about that very kind of thing. I mean, I think, Matthew, with what you mentioned, I'm always thinking about, like, of course, as a pastor, you're fielding questions like, give me some career advice, but I'm very quickly aware I may not be the best guy to give this advice, but if I can push you towards someone who is, then that's maybe the place, that's the role I can play in that situation. But we also can never provide enough events to handle finances and all of these things. But if we facilitate conversations, guys will find themselves with the money guru. They will find themselves with the guy who's generally excellent at advancing in their career. And those sorts of things create a really helpful community and really, really build men up.
Yeah, right. And I think just like with the question that you're asking, like just seeing men be, yeah, just seeing their friendships outside of the context of where we've hosted them, like that's the fruit. Like I, you know, and I've seen this not just with the a men's group that I gather, but Annie and I do a young couples dinner once a month now. And one of the fruits I see there is not necessarily that they're just, lapping up whatever 15 years of marriage advice that me and Annie may have, but seeing friendships made between those people. I just think it's invaluable.
Okay, so we're not advocating for the universal application of fireside chats for all men at all times and all places. You don't have to have a back porch to be a Christian, but we are saying that providing those contexts where the men in your church can speak freely as men, which we've seen in all kinds of cultures, whether it's hookah bars in Turkey or just coffee shops elsewhere in the world. Anything else you'd want to say as we close on just a word of exhortation or encouragement or even inspiration, in terms of what you've seen, how you would commend these practices to other guys, to, of course, the leaders in their teams of the Immanuel Network who will hear this podcast.
I can close with something. I actually have a question I'd like to throw y'all's way that I've been kind of wrestling with it for a while, on like maybe why some of the critiques that we've heard about the church towards men may be the case. But I don't know. It's something I've been wrestling with. I don't know how true it is, because it almost, when I raise the question, it's like, oh man, I believe this to be true and important, but like I wonder if it's had some cons. So here's the question I've wrestled with, particularly in relationship to men, is what we're experiencing been somewhat of an unintended consequences of the gospel-centered movement. And what I mean by that is, like, men want to be called out to do something. At least that's what I've observed in their hunger and going after all these other internet leaders that they may find. But, like, we know the gospel needs to be central, but what does it look like to call out virtue and good work and responsibility? And this may not be the unintended consequences, but it's made me think, like, with all of our emphasis, and I would say, like, what's been very pivotal in my life, and I would say in the early 2000s, is being exposed to the gospel center movement. But yeah, I don't know. That's a question I've wrestled with, and maybe it's not an unintended consequence, but like, with us always kind of going back to what Jesus has done for us. You see where the question gets hard. Have we done a disservice and maybe not calling men out in the ways? I don't know. Y'all have any thoughts there? Y'all can correct that.
Yeah, I would say that I think that you're onto something, and I would make a direct connection to some of the things I say consistently about vocation and the sacredness of vocation for men. And I've interacted with, over the last couple of decades, handfuls of men who had this idea that they were going to do some kind of church plant or vocational pastoral ministry, and then life gets difficult. They make a few decisions, and then it's not panning out the way that they thought it would. And then they've got this skill, and now they've got these kids, but they could lean into the skill and really do well in a career, and yet they have it in their mind that that's a waste of their life because it's not something explicitly advancing the gospel in their mind. And walking with guys like help correct that, of like, yeah, you don't have to be in vocational church ministry to do something meaningful for the advance of the kingdom. In fact, the majority of Christians are not going to do something vocationally for the advance of the kingdom in the pastoral ministry or church planting ministry sense. And they just, it seems to me that they have a devalued place for a career job in what would be called a secular field, and helping them recast that in their minds. I think that probably has played into if they're in that role and they have no vision for it and it's not purposeful, and they don't see it as of primary importance, then of course that would be depressing. That would be really depressing in life. That make you depressed.
I like what Ben is saying, and I would answer your question, Matthew, this way. I think there's an aspect of the gospel-centered movement that is not to blame for the current state of men, and then there's an aspect of the gospel-centered movement that is to blame. The part that I would say isn't to blame is I actually think, like, when you really get to the major proponents of the gospel-centered movement, I just actually sat under Mark Dever's preaching at Capitol Hill Baptist Church this Sunday, and he spent a bunch of time explaining why it's good to see examples and exhortations and not just the great work of theology, a great work of God's salvation. It's also good. And I think that emphasis on pressing for good works would certainly be there in Lig Duncan's preaching, in Kevin DeYoung's preaching. It's not absent there. I think that what would be absent, or what would be maybe it wasn't even ever stated, but you nailed it just a minute ago, is that sense that if you're not explicitly talking about the gospel, you're a little off. And of course, figuring out how to be really good at your job to the point where you get promoted, or you can actually turn a little embryo skill into a full-grown marketable skill, that takes a lot of talk, like nights, weeks,
and
months, reflection, planning. And so if all of that is distracting you from just meditating on the pure love of God and the atoning work of Christ, then you're going to feel guilt from doing that. And I think that kind of guilt is seriously detrimental. And I think it actually does an injustice to the kind of scriptures we've been given. So we've been given a scripture that gives us not only the grand meta-narrative of salvation, which of course ought to be the center of all of our worship and love for the Lord, but then we have a whole book on practicalities in the Proverbs. We have a book on erotic love in the Song of Solomon. We have James, which never explicitly mentions the atonement and just gets down to the brass tacks of cultivating Christian virtue. So I think that the actual theological shape of gospel-centeredness is actually always something I'm a little nervous of moving on to. I actually think gospel-centeredness is biblical. It's right to be centered on the gospel. But if it's articulated in a way that doesn't encompass our whole canon and what we were actually given in the scriptures, and that it actually, once you have the fear of the Lord cultivated in you by the cross of Christ, you should think about how to avoid adultery, and you should think about who not to take a loan out with. I think it was Douglas Wilson who said, if there was a book in the Bible that was going to tell you to change your oil regularly, it would be the book of Proverbs. And that's a good thing to know. And so I would say, again, the theological foundation of the best gospel-centered teachers, I don't have a problem with it. I'm actually nervous of losing it. But then it has to take the shape of the actual canon we've been given.
Appreciate y'all entertaining that question. Yeah,
How would you answer that question?
Sometimes, I don't know. I think that question has come up in my mind because of just seeing that there could maybe be a time of teaching, and that time of teaching being, proverbial, or just speaking wisdom into the life of, another brother, and feeling like if I don't jump to Jesus in some way, that I've done a disservice to encouraging, this person. And so, and I think that goes to what you're saying, Ron. Like we can't miss this, even though the whole canon, trajectory is towards Jesus. We can't be afraid to speak wisdom into other people's life. And I would say, and sometimes that wisdom is going to be, directly from the scriptures. But I do think there's also wisdom that's, not, necessarily, scripture, in the sense that it's been your experience, and it should probably be heated, but it can be in a give or take situation. And I think I don't know, I feel like there's maybe been I don't know if it's a hesitancy or just feeling like, well, if I'm not, getting to the gospel with this person in every conversation, how I encourage them, then I'm just failing in some sense. But I think probably maybe the bigger thing in my mind is what Ben touched on, is seeing this sacred secular divide when we think about the world that we live in, and instead seeing my work is sacred as well, because it's what I'm doing with most of my life in relationship to God.
Yeah, I think one of the things that went wrong is, at least with Together for the Gospel, we forget it was a pastor's conference meant to shape preaching. And every preacher has to have the self-awareness to know preaching is not the sum total of the church. So preaching is super important. I mean, I could spend all day talking about the importance of preaching, but once preaching's in place, that's not all that happens in a church to make for the health of God's people. And there needs to be a real consciousness of that. Otherwise, you get a spirituality where everyone's trying to sound and look like the preacher 24 hours a day and feeling guilty for every amount of time they don't do that. And that's not helpful. And I think I'll maybe close on this unless you guys.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack.
You didn't hijack the thing. This is great. I like what you're saying about just even wisdom that's not from the scriptures. Of course, we have to hold that in kind of Romans 14 kind of a way. I mean, we have to say this may not be God's truth for all time, but I think that's what brothers at your time and your place can give you. The Bible's not going to tell you how to get a job in North America in 2024, but the guy on the front porch might help. And especially he'll be of course shaped by scriptural ideas, but he's going to have the practical wherewithal and workings out in this particular culture. Anything you guys want to add before we shut her down?
No, I would just give the encouragement, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, what can I do? And I'm just like, intentionally invite a couple of guys over to your house, and has to be no agenda. Try to get to know them. Go out to coffee. Just know that there's probably a lot of men around you who are hungry for someone to pour into them, and we know they're hungry because you can see how they're all going to YouTube and podcasts and seeking for someone to pour into them. So they're hungry. So just try to create context where you can build friendships with them.
Ben, you're our guest. Give us the last word.
Yeah, I would say keep your eyes open, observe, pray, ask God for grace and wisdom, and do something. And let what you do be informed by what you see and how the Holy Spirit leads you. Because your context is not my context, is not Matthew's context. It's all going to be different with different dynamics at play. And you are the boots on the ground and eyes on that situation by God's grace. And you have the Holy Spirit to engage it in the power of the gospel. And so do it and do something. And if you fail, try something else. That's great. You have to fail in order to make progress. That's true in business. It's true in life. It's true in ministry efforts too.
Well, we hope this has been a conversation that helps you cultivate biblical men in your local church, and really just as they live out their lives through their families and in the workplace. And until next time, this has been the Immanuel Network Podcast. Look forward to seeing you next time.